Well, you're sort of like a child who loses a game and takes the toy and threatens everyone that he's going to break it. It's ridiculous, childish, but also I think it's an empty threat. The United States is obviously not going to be sending tens of thousands of people inside Syria, and the tide has already turned against the extremists. The Syrian government, alongside its allies, the Russians, the Iranians, are making significant progress. And I think that's the reason why the United States is behaving so childish. They were saying that the Russians and the others are going to get into a quagmire.
Right.
And things didn't turn out that way. They're making rapid progress across the board. And the United States is trying to use any means possible to slow it down.
Okay, Amar, if I go to you in London, do you think the Americans are sincere that they want a ceasefire in Syria? Because, I mean, if you're talking about something that could, and they're also talking about political changes, transitions there. You know, when I heard that from the secretary, I did. Again, have they given up on Assad must go, or is that still their policy? I mean, it's so confusing what's happening, what's coming out of Washington when it comes to their policy to Syria. But that's really been the case for the last 5 years. Go ahead.
Well, I think that the Americans are pragmatic. They know that the tide has turned. They are probably now in the mode of salvaging whatever they can of this enterprise in which they went alongside the Turks, the Saudis, and other players. Now, I think what the issue here is that it's that the Americans, America, unlike Russia, who is running some sort of a stable coalition in which all parties understand everybody's interests and there are no contradicting interests that are apparent, the Americans are running a coalition that has parties with contradicting interests and those who are sometimes they behave irrationally. So, for example, the Saudis want to get rid of President Assad no matter what. The Turks feel that they are contradicting with the United States vis-a-vis the Kurds, so there is a bit of clash of interest. So what the Americans are actually doing at the moment is perhaps saying to their allies, you know, go with us with this process, this political process, give it some sort of a push, a positive push, and if things don't go right, we'll be with you and there is a plan B. So I agree with Mohammed that plan B isn't really, you know, a solid set in stone thing, but it's just probably a gesture so that the Saudis and the Turks in particular would feel a bit more reassured, and they would transfer this reassurance to the proxies on the ground, which is very essential for them to, you know, go with the ceasefire.
Amar, let me go to Mike. I mean, that may be possible, but that will only work for a few days or maybe a week, 2 weeks, and then after that, all bets are off. And then, you know, John Kerry has to have his plan B. I mean, again, I mean, what can you make any sense of this? Because if you say there's a plan B, then you don't have much hope for plan A. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I think both Amar and Mohammed make useful and interesting points, but it's important to distinguish, I think, between the current dynamics swirling around us and the larger, deeper forces at work. And partitioning of former entities, whether they be nation states or empires, has been much of the enterprise of this century so far and the last century. And I think it's important to keep in mind the difference between necessary de facto partitions that happen and the kind of formal, nicely massaged and controlled partitions that you've had, say, with the collapse of the former Yugoslavia or the initial coming apart of the Soviet Union into the Commonwealth of Independent States. And those de facto, messier comings apart are still with us. I mean, you've got Russia's seizure of the Crimea, and there's South Ossetia, there's Abkhazia, there's the defense of Nagorno-Karabakh. There is a de facto partition right now in Iraq. You have a long litany of divisions and cuttings up. And I think by offering this as a possibility gives the opportunity for the situation to continue to unfold. I don't think it's at a point that we saw in the Spanish Civil War. Now, I know Russia would like to see this as the Spanish Civil War, where the then Soviet Union under Stalin decided decided to get out. Decided to get out
national security
of Spain,
interests. Okay,
and France.
It's not ideological. They're not ideological differences.
aid was no. I think
not ideological.
That's a fine point,
It's
but that's not the
geopolitical.
point I'm making. Mohammed, they were in both cases, and Stalin's approach ended. He gave up. And the French gave up the covert aid they were giving across the Pyrenees and simply operated
the whole point
in
of bringing
an
this up, Michael,
evacuation mode.
is talking
So
about.
all I'm saying,
no, excuse me. Please don't filibuster, please. Okay, please. All right. Okay, if I can go to Mohammed.
I'm
here.
not filibustering. You interrupted me.
Well,
So,
you had your fair share of time. You had your fair share of time, and I'll get back to you, okay? Okay, I'd like to go to Mohammed in Moscow.
Oh, I'm not worried about that.
I mean, comparing Syria to Crimea is just completely farcical and nonsensical, okay? What Russia didn't start the political crisis in Ukraine, and it certainly didn't start it in Syria here. I mean, the point is here, why would a Secretary of State propose a partition of a country that is a member of the United Nations, a legitimate country of the United Nations, under international law? I mean, what right does an American Secretary of State even give thought to entertaining a thought of partitioning a foreign country? Go ahead.
Well, it's not new. If you recall, in Iraq, the United States has
Okay, let me go
said
to
the same
Mohammed.
thing.
Go ahead, Mohammed.
And the U.S. Vice President a few years back was talking about dividing Iraq into different parts. But the interesting thing is that neither in Syria nor in Iraq have people been speaking about or has anyone been talking about breaking up the country seriously. In Iraq, if at least there has been talk in Arbil about some sort of partitioning of the country. In Syria, not even the Kurdish groups talk in that sort of language. So it's very odd that the United States is making threats that no one inside Syria has been making.
Okay, Amar, is this because let me go to Amar in London. Is this because of the failure of American policy here? I mean, they're just grappling at straws. Go ahead.
Well, again, America is running, or finds itself running, really a very fragile coalition, and they need to show that they can lead it, and that means a lot of compromises. But let me go back to one point here that was made by the other two guests. First of all, regarding the Spanish Civil War, I think that Syrians actually view this as a Spanish Civil War, in the sense, so internally, domestically, that you have two groups of people who have different ideas of what the state should be based upon, and they're fighting with each other, and they're fighting it out. So there is very little to compromise on the terms of the identity and the shape of the Syrian state. That's one point. Second, regarding the partition issues, there has been a lot of talk that the Sykes-Picot sort of borders have fallen out, they don't make sense anymore. Well, let me tell you that 100 years ago, when Sykes-Picot was drawn or was agreed upon, the people of the region in Syria, in Iraq, in Palestine, they were hopeless in the face of how much power the United Kingdom had, the French had, and so on and so forth. Now the situation isn't as such. And B, just like Mohammed said, there isn't any appetite whatsoever in Syria to draw lines in the country at whatever natural lines. In fact, there are no natural lines. The population is so mixed that you cannot simply do it. And there is no point in having like an eastern part of Syria, just like what the Israelis have been advocating, by the way, an eastern part of Syria where you have like a Sunni sort of state that needs a bit of leadership from the Americans. There isn't anything to suggest that people who populate those areas are very much interested in running their own country. In fact, the situation in Syria is that everyone thinks that the whole of Syria needs to be intact, but the way they see it. Now, that doesn't sound like any partition at all.
Okay, Michael, you want to jump in there? Go ahead.
The whole point I was trying to make, and Amar's touched on this usefully in terms of Spain, is that I brought up the idea of de facto partition for a situation that's not settled. In 1938, the Spanish Civil War was settled, the Russians were out, and one side was going to win and force a conclusion, as they did, although it took up to 1944 to do it, Franco's Spain became Spain. That is not the situation today in Syria. And because the U.S. has to deal with and placate allies in Arabia and Turkey, and it has to somehow find some passage in which the Kurds don't get sucked into some form of devastating pogrom again by the Turks, I think the U.S. is basically signaling the situation is still open. It's not resolved. And if it does resolve, it's going to resolve into a Levantine coast under control of Assad, the Alawites, and the Orthodox
but you know,
Christians
Michael,
there.
would you agree with me? As long as it's determined on the ground, why should an outside power determine that? Okay, I'll let everyone answer that question after we come back from a short break. Please stay with RT.
John and James need instant action and long-lasting relief from heartburn and indigestion. That's why they use Gaviscon Double Action. It gets to work instantly and lasts twice as long as antacids. Get dual relief from heartburn and indigestion. Use Gaviscon Double Action.
More and more women admire their beautiful nails, thanks to the Scholl Velvet Smooth Nail Care System, specially designed for filing, buffing and polishing your toes and fingernails. The easy way to natural-looking, shiny wow nails. Wow. The Scholl Velvet Smooth Nail Care System. And for daily nourishment, use the enriched nail oil from Scholl.
Breakfast, dishes. Dinner, dishes. Marriage, dishes. Divorce, dishes. Sleeping, dishes. Not sleeping, dishes. Life, dishes. Death, dishes. Existence, dishes. Dishes, dishes, dishes. Every dish, every time. Love your dishwasher. Give it Finish.
Standard aerosols may contain added water, which could eventually fall down and spoil the experience. Introducing Airwick Pure with no added water, so you can experience a great fragrance with no wet spray. Airwick Pure, just fragrance, no wet spray.
We all need help sometimes. Support in times of need. Someone to lean on your side. Irwin Mitchell Solicitors are widely regarded by experts as the #1 personal injury law firm, helping people get the best possible medical care and rehabilitation, as well as compensation.
That's why I'm with Irwin Mitchell. Stand by me.
Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the brokered ceasefire deal for Syria. Okay, Mohammed, I'd like to go back to you. I'm still I'm just dissecting, taking apart, unpacking John Kerry's comments, because if you just take it at face value, then I'm not sure if he wants to fight ISIL and other terrorist groups in Syria, or he's just going to give them a state. I mean, if you look at the different factions, if you look at the political geography right now, you do have terrorist groups that do control terrain in Syria. If you just listen to what he has to say, are they going to be given their turf as well? I mean, it's really wide open here, and will the world accept a statelet like that? Go ahead.
Yes, that's right. As Ammar pointed out earlier, Syria is an extremely mixed country. I've been there 6 times in the last couple of years. Damascus is an extraordinarily mixed city, and people live side by side in peace as we speak. And so if the Americans are going to split off a part of Syria, hypothetically, that would be the area controlled by ISIL. So the Americans want to give ISIL, does that mean they want to give ISIL a state? If one wants to look at it sort of conspiratorial from that perspective, it would be very much in the interest of the Israeli regime.
Of course.
Because broken and fragmented countries, the smaller they are, the weaker they become.
Yeah.
And even if you break a country down into smaller pieces, it doesn't necessarily mean there'll be peace. Look at South Sudan, for example, which has been a failure since the beginning. So I really think it's sort of what Kerry is saying is an empty threat, but it also creates animosity towards the United States. I don't think Syrians like hearing the U.S. president say we may break your country into pieces, just like when the United States would threaten Iran with all options on the table.
You know, Ammar, can you speak to that? Because, again, what the agenda of the American coalition here is very, very mixed here. And as we come to the ceasefire that will be on Saturday, I just wonder how much will they have to push it through, because it's going to be the first few days a week, and we'll know if it's going to work or not. And if Syrians know that, you know, the next step is, and it's going to be judged in Washington and not maybe facts on the ground. I mean, this, again, that creates a whole lot of uncertainty. We're not going in the right direction if we want to have a military cessation of hostilities. Then you start working towards some kind of political agreement. And it's always been, Washington has been obsessed with a political outcome and not a military outcome on the ground. They're putting the cart before the horse here again. Go ahead, Ammar.
Well, the Americans know that the groups on the ground that follow the Turks and the Saudis won't be very much interested in stopping fire, because the Turks and the Saudis are not very much interested in this entire process. Actually, they've been very much frustrated since the Russians came in. Now, what is important here is to notice that the Americans know for a fact that if certain groups on the ground, especially in Western Syria, forget about Daesh or ISIS in the east and Jabhat al-Nusra, if the Western-based groups decide to go on with the cessation of hostilities, that would put them in direct confrontation with Jabhat al-Nusra. Now, a decision like that needs to be taken not very lightly. So they fear that they would be breaking ranks, and that Jabhat al-Nusra, which is more powerful, much more funded, along with other Al-Qaeda affiliated groups or those who actually raise the same flag, ideological flag, they might be simply swallowed. So they are very reluctant, and they need assurances. And the likes of Saudi Arabia and Turkey do not want to give them assurances. So probably what John Kerry is saying here, he isn't saying if, but he's not using the term if a ceasefire breaks, but when a ceasefire breaks, because he knows it's not going to last for long.
Okay, Michael, jump in. Go ahead.
We've seen what happens when you attempt a formal partition. And what happened after World War I was a mess. And that mess, in part, helped lead to World War II. That's one end, and that's not going to happen. The other end that isn't going to happen, I believe, is you're not going to have a Spanish Civil War outcome in which one side forcibly and oppressively reestablishes the status quo ante, at least in terms of borders. What you're going to have is a continuing conflict that goes on year after year, whose dynamics are not resolved. And Russia, for example, even if it were to put Assad back as head of all of Syria, quote unquote, is going to still be supporting the Kurds as an autonomous movement against Turkey. And then there are the Druze that have to be taken care of. My point is, we're not going to go back to now ancient colonial Sykes-Picot land. That's happy talk. We're going to move forward in a completely messy way and operate as we are now at the very severe limits of what we can do. The U.S. has to operate a coalition, as does Russia, in concert with very weak, brittle partners who are not necessarily working in the U.S. interest. And I think the Kurd-Turk U.S. triangle is a perfect example of that.
Okay. Mohammed, I disagree with Michael here, and I think this is one of the reasons why Kerry had his loose rhetoric, because I believe there is a military solution to this, and it's called the Arab Syrian Army, and they are winning. And this is one of the reasons why Kerry wants to throw in a crowbar. He wants that process to come to an end. Another comment here is that Russia will not decide if Assad is in power or not. It will be the Syrian people when they have their right to express their will, their democratic will, like the people of Crimea. But that may be a different topic for another program. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Well, I think it's quite obvious that the Syrian Arab Army is making huge progress. And this is despite the fact that the Saudis and the Turks continue to support Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda affiliates in Syria. And the United States is also indirectly supporting Al-Qaeda because they're giving weapons to the so-called Free Syrian Army, and they give them to the terrorists. And the Americans know this quite well. Actually, we just saw a couple of days ago the BBC admit, and this is very important for the BBC to admit, that in Taiz in Yemen, the Saudi-backed forces that are attacking the Ansar Allah and they're trying to capture the country on behalf of the Saudis, they are fighting alongside Al-Qaeda right now in Yemen. So right now the United States is working alongside indirectly Al-Qaeda both in Yemen, or American allies are working directly with Al-Qaeda in Yemen and in Syria. If the United States was to force Saudi Arabia to change its policy, and if Turkey was to change course, without a doubt, the war, the civil war, or the rebels or the extremists, whatever you like to call them, they would be defeated, I think, within a year. But as long as we have this current situation, yes, it will last much longer, for a much longer time.
Amar, you want to address that? Because I think that's a very germane point here. I mean, if the Americans could finally get their regional allies under control, particularly Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and the Qataris, I mean, if they really put, squeeze these terrorists and other groups in Syria, this thing would come to an end very, very quickly.
I think they cannot. The Qataris are probably the easiest of the lot to rein in or to compensate in another way. But the Saudis have this genuine issue about them leading an Arab world without any other, some sort of a, how do you say, competitor. So they are interested in getting Syria and especially Lebanon as well under their reign, no matter what, how much it costs. Obviously, the Turks have other issues as well regarding their own domestic position and the aspirations of the ruling Islamic Party in order to, consolidate their position. But what we have here is that it's not going to be easy, when Michael says, for example, that, even if Russia managed to allow Assad to regain all of Syria, that just won't happen because of the Kurds, blah, blah. That is an academic position, and I respect it as a point of view, even though I disagree. But when we hear an American politician saying exactly the same, that doesn't mean that it won't happen. It means that the Americans won't let it happen. The Saudis won't let it happen. And in order to understand how much is at stake here, let's go back to the Israeli example. The Israelis, and I've heard the Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon in the Saban Forum back in December, speaking very much clearly that the Sunnis in the region are looking for the leadership of the United States, and he was very much interested in this Sunni corridor that would separate Iraq from Syria. And as if the Sunnis here, we need to understand that the Israelis doesn't have much affinity towards the Sunnis. They have plenty of Sunnis in Palestine, and they're not doing them any good. But anyway, what Israel is interested in is to consolidate a shift in regional politics and regional struggle between an Arab-Israeli front into a Sunni Shiite front, which would let Israel off its back. So they are interested in consolidating this by creating this Sunni state. And they always talk about Sunni states. Suddenly we hear about the Sunni states. Jordan now is a Sunni state. Saudi, the Gulf, Turkey are Sunni states. Well, they need to consolidate this, but it's not going to happen.
It's really interesting, Michael, it's really interesting because the Brookings Institution has been peddling this partition idea for a while now. And it's really interesting. It seems to me that John Kerry is embracing it. Of course, he's not attributing where it came from, but I read the white paper here, and I had the impression it was written by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, but that's just my take. Go ahead.
Well, Israel is going to cozy up to Russia eventually. So, I mean, there's lots and lots going on. But all three of you have come from a sort of realist geopolitical approach to what's going on. And what I see, rather, is the dominance of very passionate, committed identities that are seeking their fulfillment and realization. And that even includes the Turks, who are existentially threatened by the resurgence of Kurdistan. And the U.S. is riding herd, and I agree with Amar on this, in terms of the Sunni world, by trying to act as it has since Camp David and the fall of the Shah, by trying to act as a sort of guardian of Sunni Arab Islam, and that is coming apart. And the U.S. is scrambling, clearly, to try and keep that enterprise going. But the last thing it's going to do is permit Russia to do what Germany and Italy did in Spain in the Spanish Civil War by 1939. That would cause an even greater upheaval, probably Turkish intervention backed by Saudi money.
I don't think so. I think, Michael, that if Turkey did that, it would be one thing would be for sure. Turkey would come in second place. We've run out of time, gentlemen. Many thanks to my guests in London, Washington, and in Moscow. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.
U.S. Israel, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide. U.S. Israel, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide. John Kerry, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide. John Kerry, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide.
Palestine now, where Palestinians have marked a day of rage against the Israeli occupation. In Gaza, Israeli forces fired tear gas and even live rounds at protesters during clashes along the border fence.
Around me. Oh, what a feeling to have you by my side once again, waiting for your call, waiting for your call. As I count the endless hours, I want to be the one who's gonna get to love you.
This function today, why did it come about?
We've got a lot of things happening where we really need to get the word out that we're still alive and let the people show those in authority that we really care. And so we decided that we would hold this today. A week from now, on October 23rd, we're going to have the Land Use Commission hearing on Ho'opili. At that time, we could possibly have the land turned back. Actually, not right at that time, but soon after. And we just need to let the Land Use Commissioners know that we're powerful and that we are anxious to show them our concern. Then, as the months go on, we're going to have the Ethics Commission, the Honolulu Ethics Commission. They're going to be taking up a case that we've written up about the city council members and how corrupted they are by the money that's been given them. by Pacific Resource Partnership, by their Forward Progress, which is them again in a different guise.
And Dr. Dutto, you have some really specific numbers that these council people have, right?
Yes, yeah.
So can you name a couple just so that
let's see, we have at the very bottom those who took the least money. That would be Ann Kobayashi at 43% of the money she brought in. And then we have Joey Manahan at 47% of the money he brought in. Then we come to Trevor Ozawa at 50-some, I think, 57, I think. We have Carol Fukunaga. Carol Fukunaga got $86,000 from the BRP for her election, and that's how she got elected. We move on. We've got Kimberly Pine. Kimberly Pine, she's 72% of her money, and then besides that, she got another $90,000 from PRP. And you know, how could those people possibly vote against Ho'opili? Then we go on. We've got Ron Menor, the same, 72%. We've got Ikaika Anderson, 72%. Ikaika Anderson, when he was running for Congress, for the last 4 months, his campaign manager was paid for by PRP. I mean, it's just absolutely phenomenal. I mean, you know, it's just Ernie Martin, $286,000 from these guys.
Poor guy, huh?
Yeah. So, you know, you wonder how on earth can these people possibly vote against Ho'opili? They can't. And that's it. And this new thing where they're going to revote the rail, what a shabai. I mean, these guys are going to vote against rail? I don't think so. This is the money that's paying them, you know. So that's what we're all about today. We're trying to let people know that you know, that we really care about the land, and that we want the Land Use Commission to come our way. We want the Ethics Commission to come our way, and even the Supreme Court. We've got a Supreme Court decision coming down too.
And so, do you think that people will eventually come out and say, we got to really stop this?
I think that today is a pretty good indication, and so it's a beginning with build on this and build on this now. You know, we have the Hawaiian community out here in real force. That's really important, you know. So.
All right, what else do you want to mention to the community out there?
Just that we love you, and continue loving us.
Well, you've done a marvelous bit of work.
Thank you.
We appreciate it out here.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Okay, you know, it's all aloha aina, really. It's love for the land, and we people who are out here really love our land, you know, and that's the important thing. We need to spread the word. Aloha aina. Aloha aina.
Yeah, we sure do. Thank you, Dr. Dutto.
Okay, thank you.
What do you think?
I've learned that I had the luxury of going to ag school, and there's 13 of us that graduated.
Okay.
And through food and connecting to the land, we are very like family. And that is something that I learned, that when you do that, how deep-seated, how connected we really are. And I think that's what this is all about. Is when you lose that connection, you lose it to each other.
Why is it that we're not connected?
I think when you don't connect to life, when you don't connect to earth, to water, to sand, you lose that connection to Mother Earth, but also to each other as human beings.
And why is it that we're missing this?
I think sometimes through experiences we are woken up. We look at it at that time as something that's not easy to get through, but I think it's life telling us, letting us know that it's releasing something that doesn't serve us anymore.
Now, you think you'll be able to carry this forward and help other people?
Well, we're in the process of building a farm.
Oh, wow.
So we're proactively trying to live it in our life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I want to be able to we want to be able to share it with others.
So that can happen.
Amen.
Wow.
Amen. So we know it's important to be here.
It is.
It is.
Right. All right. Any last comments?
I mean, I just moved to Hawaii in August to work on the sustainable farm at Kemokuleia. And since I've gotten here, I've learned about Malama Aina, Aloha Aina, really caring for the land and building track homes on the land that we used to feed ourselves. It's no good.
Didn't it make you feel good?
I'm very proud.
All right, mahalo.
National banking system that's based on usury. So we are paying somebody else for the privilege to have money when we don't need to. The government, it's in the Constitution. The government's function, one of the functions, is to issue and control the currency. And we've allowed private bankers to take control of that function. We don't need a national debt. We can issue all the money we need by ourselves, debt-free, interest-free. Private central banking is a huge drag on the economy that bleeds the public unnecessarily. Thomas Edison knew it. Henry Ford knew it. A lot of people in the past knew it, but today the people that own the banks also control the media, and so the public isn't informed about it.
So where's the banking system going with all this?
Well, by controlling the currency, they control the government, essentially. And it's a simple fact. The public needs to learn about it. As long as they control the money and the media, the public won't hear about it. So people have a duty to try and inform themselves. But people are talking about it. There's a lot of discussion about it.
What about the people? Can they do anything about it?
Yeah, they can educate themselves and educate people that